Hello and welcome to Real Talk with Eddy Kara. Today we have David Bruno, our regular guest, joining us, who's our cybersecurity expert who contributes to the federal government in terms of policy. How you doing, David?
Very well. It's nice to be here. Thank you, Eddie.
Alrighty, so let's begin talking about the first 100 days of our Prime Minister Mark Carney and his favorable rating. So there was a poll done at the beginning of this month in terms of his approval rating. In fact, it's on the high end. So when Stephen Harper was first Prime Minister, he had an approval rating of 61% in 2006. Fast forward to 2015, Justin Trudeau, when he was first elected, 100 days in, he had an approval rating, in fact, the highest in recent memory, 63%.
hmm
And in Mark Carney's case, he's at 57% right now. So, what are your two thoughts about that, David? And what do you think is attributing to this very positive news in terms of 100 days in?
First of all, in regard to the comparisons to the other two leaders, I find that very interesting. I was actually going to think that his approval rating would have been a little bit higher. So I got a little bit grounded in that regard. I'm not overly surprised, to be honest with you. I have found that speaking to my own circles and others within Ottawa, this was something that Canadians were looking for. I think a lot of people that are not liberals were looking for their champion to be conservative, but at this moment in time, they didn't really care what stripe he was or she was. I think they were just happy enough to have someone that was business minded and that was going to stand up to the challenges that we are now facing with. That was supposed to be one of our strongest partners. And I think everybody knows who we're talking about. Further to that, I personally am very pleased to see that he is actually talking about things that I have even studied going back in the 90s, which is closer ties with the European Union. I do remember there was a study that I had done back in, I think, going back when I was in my undergrad, and I think it was 96 or 97. And the study was the comparison of the two regions. And so I had studied Fortress North America versus Fortress Europe. And I was right for about a blip on the radar screen, and then it went all to hell. I mean, I don't think anybody could have predicted Trump. So from here, it is very refreshing to see and to put into words what I've always thought, that Canada is the most European of non-European nations, and that our alignment with like-minded middle powers is the right thing to do. For me, it's an absolute no-brainer, and we should have been doing it anyway. I can understand that it didn't look so obvious before when we had such a tight relationship with the United States. But then again, who would have thought that any president or one person could have just ripped up those agreements? I mean, what did we sign them for? So in that regard, I thought that Carney's approval rating would have been higher than that. But I mean, any honeymoon is going to be high, and that's good enough for me for now.
So let's talk about that. Let me pick up on what you just mentioned. So there is a honeymoon effect when we're talking about when we first start a new job versus the honeymoon period that is experienced right now by the Canadian public and the global audience as well, if you want to add that.
Fair enough.
So I want to differentiate the two. So the honeymoon effect is what we call in business psychology. It's what I specialize in. So that is basically when you first start a new job, you are in a blissful state, right? And you tend to overestimate the positives of the job because it's fresh, it's new. And you underestimate and completely ignore oftentimes the negatives or the red flags you may see.
Yeah.
Right, in the job. And then eventually, when the honeymoon effect fades away, we tend to come back to sort of a much more realistic state where we notice the realities of the job itself. Oh, it's just a job, right? Same shit, different day is
So
usually the
true.
line I like to use to describe work
Yeah.
itself at a workplace. So we tend to go through that.
hmm
And if we juxtapose that to our Prime Minister Mark Carney, he's still new on the job, let's be honest. He's done stuff like this before, but
hmm
I've always been of the opinion the political realm is a little bit different, and so is the legislative realm, right?
Oh,
So
100%.
a bunch of gaffes is to be expected, and I actually prefer someone who's much more human and less scripted. And Mark Carney is definitely that. He's definitely not as scripted, and we notice that in terms of the gaffes he's made, such as calling the speaker prime minister and the House last week. Those are very human moments, and we all have them, no matter how experienced or how intelligent you may be. Let's compare and juxtapose this to what we and as the public are noticing in terms of the shiny new fresh object, or the flavor of the month, as we call it. And that is still the case with Mark Carney, and that's why we're noticing positive favorability in comparison to the opposition leader, who has still yet to win a new seat, right? I still do think, I agree with you when you said you're surprised it's not higher. I actually thought it would be a little higher than 57%, but maybe it'll change in the month of July. Who knows? Some of the things that we're noticing globally, there's a lot going on compared to like when Stephen Harper or Justin Trudeau just became prime minister too. Right? So 2006, 2015 versus now, it's a very different time we're living in. We have two ongoing wars right now. We have an unreliable and quite unstable, volatile U.S. partner.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
In terms of the president, Donald Trump, and we're still also on top of that in trade talks in terms of the tariff war that's still ongoing. It's maybe on pause right now on most aspects, most frontiers, but we're still noticing the possibility of it coming back to haunt us every single month, actually, right?
Yep.
The deadline expires here, there, different dates, different months.
Yeah.
I do think, in terms of morale, Mark Carney's still in the honeymoon effect. He's still in that phase where he's still enjoying it, right? Because in the latter years, you do notice our past prime ministers definitely not enjoying the job itself, right?
Yeah. After
Still,
the
he still
washing
has that
machine ringer has
invigorated
gone
rigor, right?
100%.
And he's still enjoying it, no matter what's going on. And I think that's someone that's highly relatable compared to someone who's totally serious every single time, even though most people think Mark Carney is mostly serious as a person. He is. I like that. But, someone who can enjoy a little bit of levity too is also good. And I'm not surprised it's in the high favorables, right? It's obviously not higher, but at the same time, it is the new flavor of the month, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But I also think right now, especially the fact that we hosted the G7 summit, which is going to be our next segment, it's a plus for him. And I do think there's going to be a little bit of positive movement in the July polling of his favorability.
Okay.
Do you think that's going to be the case?
That is an interesting question. I was going to interject and say that this honeymoon period will definitely move into the summer months after Parliament has convened for the summer. There's no reason for it to go down. I mean, he's going to be jet set and pushing the agenda without the budget, which is an advantage to him at the moment because he doesn't really have to answer dollar for dollar. He can make statements and they can sound fantastical, and we don't really have to worry about it until the fall budget. So yeah, it's going to go on definitely between July and August for sure.
One thing that's also, I think, helping him a lot is what's going on in the House of Commons. We're also noticing, other than this honeymoon phase, that he seems to be enjoying by the public perception, of course.
You mean on a personal level, himself?
No, just by the Canadian public as well,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
We're noticing the absence of Pierre Poilievre and this much more aggressive set of tactics in terms of the approach, in terms of comms and marketing.
Agreed.
In terms of the opposition. Right now, the opposition leader is Andrew Scheer, and he's done the job before. He's even been speaker, by the way.
Yes.
I do think Scheer's doing a pretty good job being opposition leader during question period, but his style is much more, shall we say, much less aggressive, right? In terms of, he still goes for the rhetoric, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't make headways because we're noticing this period of, I guess, grace, right? Where the media has, and even on social media, it's been quite toned down ever since the election happened.
I would definitely say that there is a higher level. I mean, I'm not sure if you find this effective or not, but I find a higher level of class, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Something that has been expected by the Canadian public. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard from people, just normal people, if I would throw it out there and I said, did you watch the news at 3 o'clock they would typically say, I hate watching it because I can't stand listening to them talk or heckle in the House of Commons. And that went on for years. So I definitely think that there is a more pleasant tone. It's more pleasant to listen to. That is purely my opinion. But it's not just my opinion. I've heard it from other people that the tone is different. And if the tone is different and people are tuning in, is that not what makes it effective? I don't know. That's my opinion. Now, if you're looking at it from a purely political point of view, then you would say, it's important to attack the government because that is our role and that's what makes us relevant in the House and we get coverage, but it also is exhausting. And if your goal is to convince people at the end of the day because of the parliamentary theater, then you failed. So I think I'm of a different point of view in that regard, but I find Andrew Scheer and his approach is refreshing.
Well, it's definitely much more class and elegance, that's for sure. Whether it is automatically a perception by the public and the news
That
networks.
might go away as well. There might be
So
a
that's
honey.
that's my that was going to be my next question actually. But I also, in conjunction to what you said, we are benefiting, or I guess the Mark Carney's team and Mark Carney himself are benefiting from much more civilized. A much more civil period, let's just
It
say, in
is
Parliament.
definitely noticeable, yes.
Do you expect this trend to continue? If so, till when?
Right. So, in terms of the civility
Hmm.
of Parliament, to be honest with you, I do. I have watched Parliament for many years, and I noticed that a lot of the members took their key roles out of a few individuals, a few leaders. If that means that the civility has come to pass because Pierre Polyev is not there, well, that's going to last for as long as he's not there, in my opinion. And so that will go on to the election of the by-election in Alberta. And then we'll have to see from there. Is it going to be the same person? Is it going to be the old attack dog that was groomed by Harper, that was very effective? But I mean, they're the product of their own success at the same time. So how long will this continue? Huh. That's an excellent question. I really do think it's going to continue until Polyev makes it back into the House. That's my prediction.
So I'm in agreement. So this trend of being the adult in the room, such was the case also in terms of the public's perception on the debate stages as well. Even though he's not like a Pierre Elliott Trudeau Sr. as an orator, right?
Hmm.
So he's not someone who's used to public speaking, you can tell. But, he does speak with authority in the room.
Hmm.
And I think that's what's really helping him, the adult in the room, right?
Hmm.
I do think it's going to continue even after, and I'm not saying it's going to go in the negatives right when Pierre Polyev gets elected in
Okay.
his by-election, right? Because legally speaking, the PM has up to 6 months from the resignation of the MP, and the Conservative MP resigned last week, by the way, to launch a
To launch
by-election
the
over the
by-election, yeah,
yeah, and
yeah,
then it's going to be up to 50 days of the
yeah,
by-election period, and then voila. So let's
right.
just say 7.5 months.
I'm not sure if they're going to stretch it, but that is an interesting thought,
Well,
actually.
the PM has that liberty, and I think he will, even though he said he might not. Look, let's just expect 7.5 months. I still do think it's going to be highly dependent on what's going on globally and in the US. And
Hmm.
in the US right now, whatever the President Trump is doing is still affecting us in terms of public perception, whether Pierre
Yes,
Poilievre likes it or not,
yes,
as opposed to when Justin Trudeau was in office, right?
yes,
So we're
absolutely.
noticing that the huge disparity in
Yes.
terms of
The
public perception.
the
That's number one.
approach.
Number two,
Yep, go ahead.
yeah. Yeah, number two is the upcoming midterm elections in the US, which is going to be next year. And that's going to be the main coverage by the media, particularly in the States, of course, and us over here in Canada. It's going to have a huge impact whether or not the Democrats win a lot of seats or just take back the majority in the House of Representatives by a slight majority, which is what the Republicans did in 2024.
Now, my analysis of the two is going to be that the approach this time round of Trump 2.0 is completely different from that of Trudeau. And to be honest, I don't think we didn't really know what to expect with 1.0. So I have to give credit where credit is due. He did his best, but coming around this time, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice. you know how it goes. So I'm pleased with this new approach from our government, regardless of stripe. And to be honest with you, I mean, I've said this to you before, but I'm going to say it again. I really do think Trump has done us a favor. He has done us a favor in the sense that we have never seen the Canadian public rise up and have the motivation to express themselves in terms of patriotism and in the boycotting of American products and so on and so forth. Further to that, when Carney came out and said that we're going to be funding the Canadian Armed Forces like never before or since the Cold War, the reaction from everybody else on the street wasn't that of disdain, it was that of agreement. Most of the polls are in agreement with the government, and everyone agrees that this is something that we should have done anyway, not necessarily for attack, but defense and for deterrence. So the ideals of the people and the government seem to be in line, and the stars are all in line, and none of this would have happened if it wasn't for Trump. So that to me is a fundamental piece that, I mean, there's always opportunity in adversity. In terms of the midterms, to be honest with you, yes, it's gonna be all over the media, and the media is gonna love it, both in Canada and the United States. We're gonna be talking about it until we just can't talk about it anymore, and it's probably gonna start this fall. But to be honest with you, regardless if they're going to have a flip in the House or not, will change nothing. Because the president will still have his veto, he will still be there, and he will not be, and the Democrats, no matter if they take it small, big, or then some, won't be able to change anything.
But you're forgetting the primary thing that's important, another impeachment incoming.
It won't change a thing.
Technically, what's going on with the Iran war versus Israel is grounds for impeachment.
Absolutely.
And it's been also dividing the party, the GOP as well.
Okay, but your public should also know that in the United States, contrary to popular belief, impeachment does not mean removal. Good luck.
It's still a historic thing that doesn't look good on you.
He doesn't care. Good luck.
True that. So let's take a short break, and when we're back, we will discuss about the Canada's G7 summit that just ended after this break. Okay, so we are back from our short break. Now let's talk about the G7 summit that we hosted in Canada in terms of the G7 countries in Kananaskis, Alberta, with Canada being the host, with Mark Carney being such, I would say, a very effective host. I think the role of mediator / host really suits him. It also makes him look very good on camera, I must say. So the countries that partook were us, Canada, the United States, UK, Germany, France, Italy, Japan, and European Union was also invited. And two other guests were also invited, Ukraine's Zelensky as well as India's Prime Minister as well, which was a surprising announcement. But I think
there were two others. It was South Korea and Brazil. That was another important one that was brought up.
All right. So the major things that were really discussed, well, the most shocking part was after the June 16 set of events, President Trump decided to leave. So the other things that were discussed, apart from the climate agreements, global stability and economy, global trade and tariffs, and global security, in our case, in Canada's case, was, I think, much more global security. And frankly,
you think so?
Rearm Europe and all these other deals that were
I have
announced.
A question for you. What do you think the main objective in just one aspect, one way of looking at it? What was the main objective of this conference?
Depends whose point of view you're talking about.
You.
So if it's Trump's point of view,
okay, fair enough.
Which nation, right? I wasn't there. So if it's Trump, obviously making us the 51st state. That was his main objective. He didn't care about any of the others. Yeah.
You really think
he didn't care about anything else. He was just there because it's a chore for him, right? He does not believe in the G7. He prefers his dictator buddies like Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin.
Fair enough. I think that was the
Saudis.
I think that was the relevant way of putting it. I don't think he
kept
cared about it.
Talking about this Golden Dome project he wants to include us in, which is super silly, but it was under the umbrella of 51st U.S. state.
Yeah.
Okay? Which he's still going on about, and I don't think it's going to get old anytime soon. He's going to keep on doing it till the midterms happen, and then he loses a lot of seats to Democrats, and then he'll realize, oh, it's not working, let's change the script. In our case, I do think it was to enforce our soft power tactics through diplomacy with our European players, particularly the UK, right? I do think that's to reaffirm our stance globally as a diplomatic force. Going back to the Chrétien years, I think that was the right move.
Okay.
And then it sort of segued away from that into talking about more of defense.
Okay.
Like every day, there was an announcement made about defense. So primarily it was the Rearm Europe package. Then it was about the $4.3 billion to Ukraine. So, and then it's basically NATO's 2%, right?
Yeah.
By 2026 and so on. So overall, there were a lot of strengths. That's my personal take about this,
Yeah.
right? In terms of our leadership in the world, among the attendees, of course, I do think there weren't major disruptions or faux pas or gaffes, right? I do think it enhanced our security footing, particularly with NATO and Ukraine,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Compared to the US being usually the one who propels all the other allies forward. I think we took a much more leader-like stance, and I think that's a very good thing.
I love your take on it, Eddie.
Let me just add also one thing that was mainly focused on early on,
Go
in
for it.
earlier stage, is the trade strategy, particularly between Canada and the United States.
Okay.
So we managed to secure a very optimistic, I would say, 30-day deadline for tariffs and that sort of stuff.
You find that fundamental? I'm not surprised in that in the least.
Well, I mean, look, it's been an ongoing trade war. Let's call it what it is,
Getting
right?
extensions is what the easiest thing was possible with. Anyway, that's
Yeah.
neither. Okay, fair
But
enough.
we're also not succumbing like the UK to whatever Trump wants necessarily, right?
I understand that point of view. I'm going to sum it up in a little bit more
Sure.
in like tones.
But can I ask the question to help you out in
Go
that
for it.
front? So, how would you rate Mark Carney's performance overall throughout the
Okay,
summit? And what are your thoughts about what I said about diplomatic credibility in terms of Canada versus the world?
perfect. I love the question. So here's my simplistic take, and I'm going to tie those all in together. In lieu of all of the traumatic shifting that has been happening, that is not just hyperbole. It's real and it's palpable and it's been felt by the European powers, the G7 and others, including the shifting of purchasing from China, from the United States to Brazil and all that jazz. This conference was to show the world that the G7 remained relevant. And everything they did in that time frame was to enhance or to reaffirm, as you had said, those are your own words, to reaffirm their existence matters. Now that's why you saw, from my point of view, every day had one of those new important alliance announcements of whether it was going to be rearming Europe and part of the new trade pacts that we're going to have, the new approachement with India, and reestablishing diplomatic, how can I say, relations with the high commissioners and so on. So then you look at the host himself and you ask me if you were to rank his performance. Like you said, there was no hiccups, there was no disaster, and the whole thing was held together. And just like any wedding that you go to, the most important part of the wedding is the picture. And the picture went without a hitch. We all looked like friends, and the relevance of the conference was brought to bear in front of the world, and it looked great. And therefore, that's how his rating is going to be expressed, and not just by myself or you or others. The whole world is going to be ranking it in that regard. There was no hiccups, there was no disasters. It was held together. They came out with some agreements. They love each other. Look at that photo. And therefore it's a 10. From there, in terms of, did they actually accomplish anything tangible? I don't really think it matters. The world goes on, and these bilateral and multilateral relationships were going on before the G7. So for me, the whole thing revolved around no disasters and a perfect picture. And that's what happened.
Okay, so that's a pretty good summary of what occurred. So let's talk about the European defense and procurement deal, which is a subject that's very personal to you, which was literally signed. Well, we're filming this on the 26th, so 3 days ago, June 23rd, right?
Yeah.
So just to tell our listeners/viewers, we had a strategic partnership that was signed between Canada and the EU, and it was signed in Brussels, that revolved around how Canada participates in the EU's security action for Europe, codenamed SAFE program under the Rearm Europe initiative.
Right.
So, just to remind folks, the Rearm Europe program is what we are contributing to our NATO allies in terms of defense.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So it was announced that there was going to be a significant increase to meet our 2% threshold
Right.
early on during the summits, the early stages. And then this allows, for joint defense
Yes.
provisions and procurements to be respected of 150 billion euros, right?
Oh, I think it's
It
a little bit more
allows
than that.
No, I'm just giving the main points, and you can take over
Right.
by all means. Um, one of the other things that I like is there's an annual dialogue and report stage that needs to occur officially on both sides, whether it's both bilateral parties regarding the security and the defense
Hmm.
aspects. And it allows us to have much more competitive bidding processes with with the EU defense tenders with regards to the European Commission and when Canadian businesses or companies are bidding to get those
Hmm.
contracts, right? It also allows much more coordination with in the Arctic versus the Indo-Pacific
Hmm.
spheres, military mobility, how do we secure our waters,
Hmm.
cybersecurity, and how do we manage global crises through NATO cooperation.
Hmm.
So, it's a definite segue from just letting the US lead and us being totally or mostly reliant on the
Yeah.
US actually.
Yeah, and in that regard, I mean, let's be frank. Let me explain to your viewers how this 2% has worked in the past and what it was there for. So when you say about the American-led initiative to make sure that we hit our 2%, if you've noticed, the Americans have never said we have to spend 2% on ourselves. They've mainly said spend it, just spend it. Now, in that regard, most of our or 80% of all of our procurement came from the United States. It's always been an advantage for the Americans to have all these countries that were signed on to NATO to spend that 2% because most of it was going to the United States. Now, the problem that we've had with that, and we've wrestled with it for years, although it never really slapped us in the face until now, was that all of the money that we're sending to the United States was going to be sent there, produced there, and then they were going to send it to us. And we're going to have this wonderful cooperation. Until that worked as best as it could until now that it was thrown in our faces. And one of the things that had come up because of that was this mystical F-35 kill switch. Now, I know what people are thinking in that regard. That there's no way that the Americans could have this little switch, literally a kill switch, that they flick it on and the F-35 would go blank and then off it goes. But it's actually more fundamental than that. The sophistication of the F-35 is such that if they decide not to do an update on that highly sophisticated software, well, there's your kill switch right there. So yes, there is a kill switch. Call it whatever you want. Describe it any way you want, it's there. So having said that, now that the rest of the world is now up against that same problem, because don't forget, that's the reason why the Americans geopolitically had been such a driving force in Europe, because the procurements were going mostly to the United States, except for a few European companies that we all know of, the Rafale project and that of the UK's and the submarines and so on. Now that we have a shift in geopolitics, the powers that be, or those that were the middle powers, are now looking within themselves and thinking, what do we do now? So there is a reason why the Europeans and Canada have had this very fundamental summit. And if you will notice, there was no mention of the United States at this EU Canada summit of procurement. And then the next question is, well, why did we even need it? There's two folds in that regard. One, we've never had a procurement that was open between us for military spending. And B, the optics to show that Europe is not a pushover, neither is Canada, and that we're going to band together like other middle powers and we're going to get things done. I do agree that this is very different from what we've had before because there, like you said, there are meetings in between, and that's fundamental. That says that there's going to be benchmarks, or hopefully benchmarks, and that money is going to be spent amongst us, and the Canadian companies for the first time are going to be able to bid for European procurements. That's huge. That's a big leap forward, and that's probably going to help in terms of Canadian infrastructure and advancement. So where is this going to go? The European Union has committed to spending in total a whopping 1.3 trillion dollars. So there is quite a bit of money that's going to be spent on military procurement, and I think this was a great move for the government in terms of when their policy was infrastructure. This also is going to translate into internal infrastructure, no matter how you see it. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can skin this cat. So this is a really big deal for Canada and the EU, and this also gives them a shot in the arm, saying we can come together. We don't necessarily need the United States. There were a lot of people that were very afraid when the Americans started to pull out. And I think this is the beginning of a rapprochement, of standing on our own 2 feet, as it will.
So, what do you think about the Ukraine significant increase in investment of $4.3 billion? So, it will be $2 billion in new funding to buy ammunition, armored vehicles, and drones. And then another $2.3 billion will be loaned to them so that they can rebuild whatever infrastructure,
Yeah.
whatever cities that they used to have.
Well, the Canadian government's not alone. I mean, you can even see that the government of Manitoba itself has also committed to using their own funds to helping rebuild parts of Ukraine. That's not new. We also knew a couple of years ago that South Korea had also signed an agreement with the government of Ukraine and with members of the Rada to carve out a section of Ukraine and then fund that redevelopment on their own. So I applaud the government for this new announcement. It's not new, but I think it's the right track. I mean, we've been allies with Ukraine going back to the free trade agreement that was signed by Trudeau, and it leads to this moment, I think.
So overall, I think, look, the $4.3 billion in investment had a lot of mixed feedback on social media, particularly. I would say at a time when we have a lot of crises at home, particularly with affordability, I'm a little bit concerned. But apart from that, I do think diplomatically we needed to establish our foothold and increase our footing. However, it also does not go hand in hand with the PM's promises to be much more fiscally responsible, right, during his mandate. So I do think that's what is attributing to the mixed messaging or the mixed feedback among folks in Canada.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. The same thing was brought up even in the UK, for example, when they had decided they had to reshift their finances in funding a greater push for the military, and they took it away from international aid money that they had earmarked. So I understand how people can be concerned, but soft power, I'm not even sure if we can call this soft power, to be honest with you, because Ukraine is clearly a war zone. This would be an overt support for that country. I think we have to make things clear, though. It's not really, it wouldn't be international aid, would it? This is support for an ally.
Well, I wasn't talking specifically about Ukraine when I said soft
Okay.
power. I said in terms of the summit itself, but hard power would be us sending troops, which,
Or
Mark
equipment.
Carney's not committing to as much, right, as like US, let's say, but under Biden. Overall, I would say that I think in the earlier stage, as well as throughout this summit, Mark Carney was elegant, classy, poised, and the role of host/Canadian mediator really suited him, especially the first day with Donald Trump making headways when he said, "I'm a tariff person," and then with Carney consistently at the UN even being asked by reporters about the US, and he didn't fall into the trap of answering on behalf of the US. And he handled Christian Amanpour's interview on CNN very well as well. So I think it was a major plus, and I do think it's going to help him with the favorability ratings in the upcoming set of months.
I agree. He held himself very well. I'm pleasantly surprised in that regard, and I'm even more pleasantly surprised to see him held in such high regard internationally. I'm very pleased with that.
All right. So our next segment's going to be about the next Bond film, so stay tuned.